Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan, and grab a drink, get comfy, because today we're going to be talking about one of the most important ships in the late Republic era. The ship had a unique design, and it foreshadowed the true intentions of the Galactic Empire and what their military would do to the galaxy in a few years to come. And this ship's development was mired in political controversy and corporate warfare, which led to this ship being built with way too high expectations and way too many requirements and features. While this might sound like the bidding process, design, and execution for the F-35 program, I assure you it's not. What we're talking about is a lot larger. Before we continue, a quick word from our sponsor for today's video. Foundation Galactic Frontier for both mobile and PC platforms. Yes, that Foundation from Isaac Asimov, a sci-fi franchise which heavily influenced Star Wars creator George Lucas. Play as a traitor and explore the universe of this classic space opera, visit dozens of galaxies as the captain of your own fleet of ships, and customize and build your flagship with over 30 different rooms, and recruit an elite team to make sure your operation is always running smoothly. Manage your limited resources properly, make the upgrades you need, and make the right decisions as you interact with other factions. Engage in Galactic Frontier's dual battle system, which includes fierce space battles and risky ground skirmishes as well. It's not all about conflict, of course. You can also start guilds and make an impact so large that even Psycho history can't ignore your actions. Foundation Galactic Frontier is the first mobile adaptation for Asimov's Foundation and blends lore and character from both the TV show and the novels, such as Harry Seldon, Bel Rios, Hober Mallow, and the Mule. The game takes place in between Season 2 and Season 3 of the show, right before the Mule arrives and starts controlling everyone with his psychic powers. So take advantage of all the riches and adventure the galaxy has to offer during this period, for this is the era of the free trader. Check out the link in the description down below or scan the QR code on screen to download the game. Don't forget to use our exclusive code GENTECH, that's all caps, to get extra resources to make the beginning of your journey a little easier. When we think about the Galactic Republic Navy during the Clone Wars, we generally think about the Venator-class Star Destroyer, a jack-of-all-trades, master of none, a carrier, and also a battleship. All things considered, the 1,000-meter-long vessel from Quadrant Yards exceeded expectations and performed heroically throughout the war. The designers of the ship were literally still in the prototype phase as the first hulls were being deployed to the front. We've all heard of the issue that automakers have when they start production of a new car, right? You got panel gaps, software issues, lithium-ion batteries exploding and creating wormholes. During this initial phase of your first few actual working models, some companies even hand assemble them just so they can smooth out the production process, right? New vehicle programs are extremely complex. We're talking about thousands of suppliers, millions of parts, and increasingly complicated software programs that control everything. And if you want to stay ahead of the competition, you're going to have to also be able to remotely update this software for your clients. Manufacturing complicated things, cars, starships, semiconductors, it's always going to be very difficult for that first few batch. You're going to have to try to figure out the actual manufacturing process. This is why you never should buy the first few models of anything, whether it's a car, a laptop, Death Star. Now, if you think the problems that new car manufacturers face is massive, now imagine those problems scaled up to the size of a Venator. Now, we're not talking about thousands of suppliers, we're talking about millions of different suppliers. We're not talking about a million parts, we're talking about a billion parts. And so at those first few battles, where the Venator was deployed over Ryloth and Christophsis, everything on board these ships, all the essential systems, were still being tested and calibrated in the heat of battle, which is kind of crazy. To make matters even worse, many of these ships were deployed with skeleton crews that were relatively untrained. There were rumors that a certain 13-year-old Padawan had been allowed to lead an entire sortie of 9-year-old clones to their deaths. I mean, just imagine that headline in the Holonet from the, the more sensational outlets. Child leads a bunch of younger children to their glorious deaths above Ryloth. But for the most part, the Venator-class Star Destroyer worked as designed and was a terrific stopgap measure that turned into a legitimate capital ship. Ultimately, its biggest flaw was also its greatest strength, the massive hangar that runs down the entire length of the ship. Excellent for allowing the Venators hundreds of starfighters to deploy quickly and also return quickly, and also excellent for enemies to target. I mean, just make it past the massive hangar door and, you're beyond all of the armor and the shields, and you can do terrible damage to the most vulnerable parts of a ship. The Venator's extreme design created some glaring weaknesses, and despite being a capital ship, the Venator struggled at close-range battle against other heavily armed vessels, and needed to be screened by picket ships, which the Republic was quite short of in the beginning of the conflict. conflict. At the same time, the clone army on the ground was constantly being outnumbered and required not only air support in the form of air sorties, but also direct fire support in the form of orbital bombardment. Something the Vanguard-class Star Destroyer could do, but not very well. It just lacked the firepower and was also quite vulnerable to enemy fire. Having snub fighters doing bombing runs is definitely helpful. That's something the Vanguard did excel at, but nothing beats the intensity and speed of turbolaser barrages coming from low orbit. And so in the earlier years of the war, Palpatine's government came up with the Victory Project, or the Victor Initiative Project. And no, this wasn't some larger sweeping strategy to end the war with the Separatists. It was one of many projects active under the Department of Naval Procurement of the Galactic Republic's Defense Procurement Office, and it was basically focused on creating better vessels to make the Galactic Navy more well-rounded. And every shipbuilder in the galaxy, was scrambling for these type of contracts, big and small. Remember, we're coming from a period of extraordinary peace and demilitarization, and so it was actually a relatively level playing field in the shipbuilding industry. You only had a few really big dogs, and the rest of the suppliers were all pretty new to the game. And every shipbuilder, every defense contractor understood that if you secured a contract today, that could guarantee decades of work from the central government and potentially new contracts for other starships. So everyone was going all out during this period to secure these contracts. The Victor Initiative Project had one main goal, and that was to design a capital ship that could legitimately fill the frontline duties that is required of a ship of the line. Think traditional maritime battles where usually both forces put their ships in line, therefore the name Ship of the Line, and they, generally got close to each other and exchanged broadsides. During the late Republic period, most space battles were done up close and personal, just like the 7th century, and ships of the line needed to be able to dish out a lot of punishment and also absorb a lot of punishment as well. A secondary requirement for these ships was tons of firepower so that these vessels could serve as fire support for ground forces. Basically, they needed to balance out the Vanguard-class Star Destroyer. They needed to find the PB to its J. And most of you know that the Republic mainly used quad drive yards or their subsidiaries like Rothana Heavy Engineering for their capital ship designs. As mentioned before, the Ruusan Reformation basically killed a lot of the larger corporate defense contractors. And the ones that survived basically had to either cater to local defense needs or shift their business to also include commercial and civilian designs. Yeah, you'd think that, galactic peace was great for everyone, but actually a lot of arms dealers, a lot of defense contractors couldn't make enough money to feed their kids. No? No sympathy? Quad drive yards have been formed during this time of peace after the Ruusan Reformation, and it quickly scaled up its operations, which were centered around Kuat's famous planetary shipyard ring. There's never really been a shipyard as large as this, and as such, when the Clone Wars started, it was only natural for Kuat to take on these contracts. No one could really beat the speed, cost, and scale of Kuat's operations. But here's the thing, the Galactic Republic was still a properly functioning government with bureaucrats at every level doing their part to make sure things were done properly. And I guess a lot of the officials in the defense establishment wanted to diversify the Republic Navy's procurement. They didn't want to just get all their capital ships from one guy. And so when the Victor Initiative Project was created, the goal was to contract a shipyard that was in Kuat and diversify the military-industrial complex. But again, Kuat was so dominant that people quickly realized that really they were the only shipyard that had the capability of at least kind of providing the know-how and resources to build these ships. And so what happened instead, they didn't give the contract completely to Quad Drive Yards. They made Quad Drive Yards partner with another major shipbuilder, in this case, Rendelli Star Drives. At one time, you could say that Rendelli Star Drive was kind of like the Quad Drive Yards of the Old Republic, as in, it created the majority of their capital ships, including the Hammerhead cruiser, which, the Republic used for 4,000 years straight. I'm not even joking about that. But ever since the Ruusan Reformation, the dismantling of the Republic Navy, Rendelli Star Drive has been struggling. But this wasn't just a handout for Rendelli. Rendelli Star Drive still had plenty of capacity left at their shipyards, and KDY was busy maintaining and refitting the massive Venator fleet, so they kind of needed to work together on this. And so Kuat would give the project to one of their most skilled starship designers, Walix Cantwell Blissix. Blissix is perhaps one of the most consequential ship designers of this era. He was the artist behind the Delta 7 Aethersprite Light Interceptor, the Alpha 3 Nimbus-class V-Wing, the RZ-1A Wing Interceptor, and also the Gladiator 1 Star Destroyer. As you could tell, Blissix's signature design shape was the triangle or the wedge, and he would incorporate that into his new design, the Victory 1 class Star Destroyer. Unlike the Venator class Star Destroyer, the Victory was a very condensed, ship, no large open space hangar, just a crazy amount of firepower and munitions stored in a 900-meter long vessel. Slightly shorter than the Venator and about half the size of an Imperial-class Star Destroyer. The ship was not only more condensed, it was a lot more vertical, featuring the terrace look we're more familiar with on later Star Destroyers. The primary reason why they made this ship more vertical is the same reason why, the Old Republic like Hammerhead cruisers. This way you can kind of tier the weapons and give all of your turbolasers a wide firing arc, basically. The Venator-class Star Destroyer mainly relied on its complement of fighters for defense and offense. Its turbolasers were more of a support weapon or afterthought. With the Victory, it was the other way around. This ship was able to pummel enemy vessels in each one of its weapons configuration. The most popular being 10 quad turbolasers and 40 double turbolasers, along with 80 concussion missile tubes for more precision targeting. This thing completely outclassed the Venator-class Star Destroyer up close. It could probably take 2 or 3 of them before the Venator stump fighters, rip apart the Victory. But even then, that wasn't easy to do. Even compared to the later Imperial-era warships, the Victory had an exceptionally strong hull and thick armor plating. Again, I think this is due to the fact that the Victory's very condensed. It's like, Frank Gore in his prime or Mike Allstott. You can't knock someone's head off when they don't have a neck. The more we tell you about this thing, the better the Victory sounds, at least on paper. The Star Destroyer also had 10 tractor beams, a Class 1 hyperdrive, which really puts it in the 1% when it comes to FTL speeds. This thing could carry up to 2,040 troopers, along with a pretty decent-sized motor pool of walkers and turbo tanks. This ship also had a complement of 24 TIE fighters, and it was designed to be powerful enough to fly and maneuver in atmosphere, better than most Star Destroyers. This is really useful if a planet's upper atmosphere is too thick to properly target, orbital bombardment. Also, in uncontested airspace, Victory could pretty much just hover a mile off the ground and just lay waste everything on the ground. It's a pretty intimidating tool to have on your side. The Victory's engines and repulsor lifts were said to be so powerful that some smart captains would actually evade pursuing ships by diving into a planet's gravity well. But again, this is all on paper, and while some Victory-class Star Destroyers performed admirably, the Victory-class Star Destroyer program, for the most part, was a complete disaster. Unlike the Venator, the Victory didn't benefit from the fear and sense of urgency and unity that was prevalent throughout the Republic in the opening moments of the war. The Galactic Republic had been caught with their pants down, and it desperately needed a fleet. Everyone wanted the Venator-class Star Destroyer to succeed, and so it received minimal bureaucratic and political resistance. But when the Victory enters service around 19 BBY, the war was pretty much over already. The Outer Rim siege had begun. The Separatists were cornered in the Outer Rim. The battle lines had stabilized, and the Senate was back to being greedy and, self-advocacy. First, it starts with the fact that Rendelli and Quad both hate each other and had, powerful representation in the Galactic Senate. Quadrive Yards accused Rendelli of industrial espionage, and, they totally did. They spied heavily on Quad, especially after they won the contract for both the Acclamator and the Venator. And so both sides kind of devolved into useless fighting, about who was providing the manpower for what parts of the project, at which shipyards components were being built. Basically things that were unimportant to the war effort. On top of that, the Victory ran into all sorts of problems. Unlike the Venator-class Star Destroyer, which miraculously was deployed with limited issues somehow, the Victory required a massive amount of maintenance because of all of the complex components on board. Many of them were first-generation designs that just needed, a little more time, a little more, testing. Also, the hyperdrive couplings oftentimes malfunctioned, which is a huge problem, and many of the fire control systems were bugged as well and needed constant fixing. And for some reason, an electrical system would, short circuit every now and then and electrocute entire units of barracks, killing everyone on board. So the ship was actually nicknamed the Coffin Ship, and knowing how superstitious sailors are, that is not good. Ultimately, the Victory-class Star Destroyer would receive some upgrades with the Victory 2, but for the most part, the ship was a failure from a production standpoint. It was really too late to make a huge difference during the Clone Wars, and by the time the Empire took over, there were newer, larger, more, fancy-looking Star Destroyers that could take its place. The Victory-class Star Destroyers that hung around were usually used in base Delta Zero attacks on unruly Outer Rim worlds. Not exactly the most noble mission for such a vessel. Still, with all of their systems stabilized within a few years, this was a ship that packed a lot of punch. It was much cheaper to operate than an Imperial-class Star Destroyer and had probably like 80% of its capabilities, which is pretty good. And even if the combat service was lackluster for the Victory definitely established a trend in starship design that would essentially take over the entire Imperial fleet. When I take a look at ships like the Imperial class or even the Executor class, I know where that shape and design philosophy originally came from. The Victory Project. Warts and all. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to subscribe, hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy. I'll see you next time.